All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PetroNerds podcast. I say this every time, but I am super pumped today. It is Friday, October 6th, if I am correct. Friday, October 6th, 2023. This is episode 98 PetroNerds podcast. We're getting super close to 100. And I am delighted to have a guest with me today and a friend and colleague, Tad True. He is the vice president of Bridger Pipeline and a part of the family suite of True companies. So, Tad, welcome to the PetroNerds podcast.
Thank you, Trisha. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Tad did tell me that this is his first podcast, so this is a pretty exciting thing for me. So I have to make this awesome for Tad, so that all the other podcasts that he's on will just pale in comparison to the awesomeness of the PetroNerds podcast. So, Tad, we'll have a number of things that I want to cover with you today. Things that from the you are you can explain a little bit of the Bridger Pipeline and your suite of stuff throughout the Rockies. So obviously, this is an opportunity, I think, to talk about Wyoming, to talk about North Dakota production, to talk about pipeline situation in the Rockies and production. But before that, I want to timestamp this with we've had a pretty wild swing in oil prices. Would love your comments and feedback if you have anything you want to comment on that, because we're 82.36 right now for WTI. And I just want to remind people that we were at 94 like September 27th. So we've had a rapid swing up and a really rapid swing down. And the market sentiment on this is pretty interesting. Brent is 84. We've lost like 13 bucks on Brent from September 27th to yesterday, which is pretty incredible. Henry Hub, though, that's the great story for everyone, I think, is Henry Hub is 328 today. So when you're starting to see threes on Henry Hub, that's pretty exciting, I think, for the business. Dutch TTF is at 1120. I think we're starting to see this edge up a little bit on gas for European natural gas. And then the 30-year, the big story today actually in the market is the jobs report, which was way, way bigger than expectations. Expectations were 170,000 jobs added, and today was over 300,000. And so the 10-year yield is reflecting that. It's at 4.81%. Interestingly enough, the ticker on the 30-year mortgage, on at least on CNBC, is not showing it up, but I think we're going to see that go up. So 10-year yield and the U.S. mortgage are tied closely together, and yeah, that's 4.81% on the 10-year yield. Obviously, that's wreaking havoc in the whole market, and we've got debt issues and craziness in Washington and people losing their minds. So a lot of the global backdrop or macro backdrop. Tad, do you care to talk about the state of oil price? Maybe you can comment on oil prices in the context of North Dakota Light Sweet, Wyoming prices, like any of that you want to tackle?
Sure. Obviously, oil prices have a direct effect on our customers. As a federally regulated pipeline, we issue tariffs, and those rates are, we can't change them on a month-to-month basis. So we're not directly affected as a pipeline, we're not directly affected by the oil price, but it does matter to our customers, which means it matters to us. The and the oil prices that our producers get, now that there's I don't mean to overwhelm the conversation here, but now that there's
No,
a
go ahead.
surplus of pipeline capacity out of North Dakota, oil prices are basically you effectively get a direct WTI price back in North Dakota. It's no longer 10 years ago, there was discounts of like 10 to 15 to 20.
Yeah.
In some cases, like $40 to the world, compared to the world prices. So the infrastructure has come in. It's there. It's overpiped, I would argue, but that's a huge benefit to our customers, which encourages them to drill and increase overall throughput.
So if
We're
we can
happy.
back up us, well, that's great, and we can back up a smidge and give people a lay line. I mean, this. I've worked with you on past projects, and Tad was actually on the board of the Energy Policy Research Foundation when I was there. So Tad and I know each other from quite a while ago, back in the days of the
Long time.
the craziness of the midstream side, which when WTI and Brent were completely, those differentials were blown out, and North Dakota Light Sweet was blown out. And yeah, it's a completely different world today where you actually are. I didn't see the prices today, but sometimes you're actually getting a premium on North Dakota Light Sweet. I don't know what you're getting in Guernsey today, but I'm guessing it's pretty close to WTI. And with that Brent WTI spread narrowing, obviously you're getting very close to global oil prices. But the major systems from and it's still the case is, you have Dakota Access, which was the big win for North Dakota in terms of really helping on this pricing side of having ample pipeline capacity. And that just kind of also coincided with, you got Dakota Access, you got flow, and you have your pipeline system, which I would love to talk about, volumes and stuff. But then you also had COVID happen and a collapse in, for at least a short collapse in production, and this real sort of change in the Rockies, where if you're looking at, I think, public and private operators within the Rockies, I love listeners know I absolutely love the Bakken. I think the rock is phenomenal. I've had Harold Ham on the podcast. We've talked about it. And I love the Powder as well for different reasons. But, we have now a much more seasonal regimen of drilling and completion activity in North Dakota. So you're not drilling, it's not drill, baby, drill. Acreage is held by production, and you have a lot of public operators that have held their acreage, and a lot of those operators have, moved into the Permian, etc. So with that being said, you have ample pipeline capacity now out of North Dakota. I believe production in North Dakota is about 1.2 million barrels a day. And I want listeners to appreciate is, like, people have lost a lot of love, I think, for the Rockies. And it's just a nice, I mean, it's sad because it's such steady production. I mean, North Dakota production is great. If you look at decline curves in North Dakota, they did fantastic over the past year. They've actually, productivity is up. And you don't see that in the Powder necessarily. Productivity is not holding up, but I mean, North Dakota, you are. So it's just I think the production story is, pretty incredibly resilient, despite everybody saying we're running out of acreage and we don't have enough inventory and we're losing our minds. And when I talk to people in North Dakota, and especially folks like yourselves, that is never the case.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me. It's I actually like reading the news where they say it's a mature basin. There's no more there's no more growth. Because that keeps other people away. I'm sure our operators our customers like it as well. The producers, because what we're seeing is it's gone from 1.1 to 1.2. It's not a huge growth
Right.
figure, but it's what's interesting is if you get into the like county by county production numbers, Dunn County is surging, while some other counties are dropping, and so it's we have the benefit of having some great customers that really know how to drill their acreage, and they're aggressive. It's fun trying to keep up with them. But overall, we're continuing, at least from a pipeline standpoint, we're continuing to grow, grow tremendously, and we're pretty excited about it.
Can you talk about rough flow volumes and system volumes? I mean, so we know we have Dakota Access. I don't know I know the nameplate capacity, but rough, like, I mean, we have Dakota Access. You can go through Enbridge and you can go into the Midwest. Obviously, those used to be huge issues. Those are no longer bottleneck nearly as much because of all the build out the Enbridge did. But your system goes from North Dakota down into Wyoming, and then you go into Guernsey, and that can then flow into Colorado, which then goes into Cushing, Oklahoma, right?
Right. Yeah. So
And yeah, go ahead.
so just to give kind of just an overview, effectively, we have a very large gathering system in North Dakota. Feeds our trunk line that goes down, like you said, into Montana, into Guernsey, Wyoming. We also have a large, but not as big as North Dakota by any means. We have a large gathering system in Wyoming in the Powder, which also feeds into Guernsey. And then in terms of our assets, we also own 25% of Liberty Express, which is the parent company of Pony Express, and that feeds into the main line that feeds into Cushing, Oklahoma.
Okay. So you guys have a major system, and then you have access into a major, obviously, into Cushing. So,
Right.
and that's, I mean, do you care to share that I would love your perspective of the jarring story between pre-COVID. I had Chris Atherton recently on the podcast, and I bring people on, and I think the story of sort of the pre-COVID to now is would be interesting to hear from Midstream perspective, especially in the Rockies. Obviously, the story of the Rockies, before COVID, you said 10 years ago, we had these massive differential blowouts and we're all trying to find pipeline capacity. And, in the DJ, we didn't have enough pipeline capacity, and then everybody builds pipeline capacity and then we have enough, and that's great. And the differentials come in, and it's nice. But I'm curious, as like pre-COVID, COVID, and now, how big are, and how jarring and how crazy was all that for you?
Uh, COVID is an experience I'd never like to relive. We actually in 2019, again, Bakken production was continuing to go up. I think it even hit 1.4 at some point. The numbers escape me right now, but it was a huge growth story. And Dakota Access had been built, but it still wasn't enough. And then so we were in the process of trying to compete with the rest of the pipeline operators. And then in 2009, we commercialized a very large build for two companies. It was built, biggest project we've ever done. We FID'd the project with our partner in June of 2019. The project was basically to build, new steel from North Dakota to Guernsey. That would have been, our piece. And then we had a joint venture with Phillips 66 to build a Guernsey to a new piece of pipe from Guernsey to Cushing. And then there was a related project, and that was the original Liberty project, to go from Guernsey to Cushing, and then a related project called Red Oak to go from Cushing to Corpus Christi. And we commercialized that, FID'd it, ready to go, and then COVID hit. And we were already under construction, at least on our 100% owned piece. So we were, building close to 450 miles worth of 20 and 16-inch. We were well under construction. When COVID hit, Liberty hadn't yet been. I mean, we'd been spending a ton of money. We'd bought steel, we've bought right away, we've done permitting, we've done all this stuff. And then March of 2020 came, and we had to halt all capital expenditures, unfortunately. And a couple months later, some of our producers went bankrupt, or some of our customers went bankrupt. Some of our, our partners were, kind of wavering on whether or not we should do it. We should just cut our losses. And then in, June of 2020, we ended up, just stopping the project altogether and just trying to reassess, what we had to do. And that was obviously a pretty, it's pretty sad at that point.
Yeah.
But because we were, from a capital standpoint, we were pretty much halfway through our capital spend by, June of 20, and we had, with the project, effectively the project canceled. We had no commercial contracts, supporting anything. So we had to re-commercialize the entire prospect. We found a new partner, which is in Tallgrass, and that relationship has been great. And we've been kind of going ever since. It's so, in the middle of COVID, I think back, and everybody's, on these WebExes. We were working 7 days a week to try to save the project. And it was an incredibly stressful time. It was something I never want to relive, because, when you go through half your capital spend and you have nothing, come out of it with nothing, nothing to show for it. That's tends to make people sad. So.
Yes, I think, well, that's a great, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. And I remember being in meetings with you years and years ago, and you gave me I think it was something you said, it's like things are like kittens and roses and daisies, and then fast forward 5 years, and those kittens and roses and daisies are all gone, and the Skittles are gone. And I think that COVID time was, it's important to share that stuff, because I think a lot of people on the outside of the not super close either to the midstream or even the production side or anything, don't appreciate how jarring that state of the business was. I mean, because all of us, if you had a business,
Sure.
clients went to zero, money went to zero, work went to, you're working 13 hours a day, 7 days a week to just survive, and hang on and pray that the light is shining at the somewhere down the tunnel, the light shining, and it was absolute hell. Um, so when you went through all that and then you come out on the other side, obviously there's and things are looking great now, are looking much better now. And that wasn't fun. But I mean, you're on the pipeline side, and I thought everybody heard. I think a lot of listeners probably heard, when prices went negative, is that pipelines were used as storage, and the pipelines were completely full, and that was part of they were all used as storage. Was that the case? One, do you agree with that? And two, what were you actually being used that way, or were you full
Uh,
and just like waiting to like we can't go into Cushing because we're packed?
well, I mean, physically, our pipes are always full. That's just how they
Right,
operate. And we went from you know, like at least in our case, production just got shut in. Like
right,
our
and that happened quickly
customers,
in North Dakota.
yeah, and they just our throughput went. Uh, it didn't go to zero, but it went. It might as well have. We were uh, you know, our engineers, what was interesting was our engineers were actually looking at our pumps and saying, look, you know, we let's say our throughput dropped by 80% in a month. Just an example. Our engineers were like, we can't run our pumps this slow. We just can't. They can't run this slow. And so we had to we had to jump through a lot of hoops just to get keep whatever production
Yeah.
we had moving. The one thing I'll also say that I missed last time was that we were under construction of uh, one of our wholly owned main lines, and so we had a tremendous amount of cash just exiting the door. And when everybody shut their production in, we had no cash coming in, and
Yep.
that was yeah, it was a pretty scary time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And well, obviously you got through it, and you guys stuck through it, and um are you fourth generation oil and gas, Tad?
Third.
Third. Okay, I'm third generation oil and gas too. So I think it was probably a little bit easier for some of us who were like, know the booms and bust. Yes, it was absolute hell. I've never experienced that, but you kind of knew that, hey, you're in this business. I don't see the true family just being okay, throw in the towel, we're out of oil and gas, and walk away. So I do respect that. So what is your
Let,
throughput
let,
goes
let me
to, I
let me say
imagine
this.
it.
Let me say
What?
this, Trisha. Though, yeah, we've gone through a lot of boom and bust, but I don't think anybody's in history's had a bust like that one.
No, no one in history had a bus like that. And also, and that's, I mean, to the for the production side, I think it is really important to point out the shut-in. And I say this because, I was talking with folks within OPEC, at the time of this shut-in, production. It was months after, but it's in COVID when we're doing all the Zoom calls. And I had some calls with, folks that I work with in Oxford and otherwise. And but there were folks within OPEC and related entities, and there was a lot of questions around like production in the US, and there was a big surprise on like the production coming back. And I thought, I was really shocked to hear this. And I remember you probably listened to EOG's earnings calls and other earnings calls where they're like, hey, shut in the production, turn it back on, got a little bump in production. And I mean, Wall Street analysts are like, wow, look at that production growth. And I'm like, it's not. Okay. It's not like growth. This is what happens. You shut in this production, and by the way, we've never shut in unconventional oil before. We've never shut in,
Right.
horizontal these unconventional production in North Dakota. And all of a sudden we shut it in. I mean, in North Dakota, it was fast. Everybody's like, shut this stuff in. And naturally you're going to get a production bump. That pressure is going to build up. And so you turn those wells on, you're going to get a little pop. And it was kind of amazing because I realized that one, Wall Street analysts are not engineers, nor do they know anything about basic production. And I was really shocked though to hear the foreign perspective, and I'm not saying everyone, but I think, OPEC admittedly said they, publicly, that they were shocked about the growth in U.S. production. And it really made me appreciate, as you and I have talked about this offline before, and in the past, is that I don't think they really understand deeply U.S. production. But the fact that they were shocked that, we shut in this production and we turn it back on, maybe they were shocked that we turned it back on, but they shouldn't have been shocked that uh, it would come back. I mean, it's not like we killed these wells or anything. We just had never shut them in before.
Yeah. I mean, and I still don't have an appreciation for like, what does a shut-in do for, horizontally fracked well? Uh, I simply don't. I'm not a geologist. I, right now the production seems to be surging. I think it's been great recently, but like, I do remember I actually, coming out of COVID, we also had a surge in capacity, and from a you know from our standpoint, it was just a welcome relief just to get oil flowing back through the line.
Yep. Yeah. And helping all those engineering problems that you were having on just keeping,
Right.
the pumps going. Yeah, I can only imagine. So, all right, so that all, that happened, production's flowing again. When do things start? I'm sure it took a little while to get back to your volumes, but when does things start really recovering to where it's like, okay, because I mean the story with I always walk people through this, especially with the Permian. The post COVID story, and during COVID was actually the private operators, private companies like yourselves. Actually, you guys have a little bit of a, not you, but True has a little bit of production and drilling, but a lot of private companies actually saw the price signal, were ready to go. And while publics had all lost their minds and they were dealing with the jarring of COVID, they were trying to tell the story to the street, but they were also inundated with boardroom craziness and, an energy transition and green stuff. And the privates are like, hey, look at oil prices, let's go. And I believe there was, the folks that were really early to this did capture a lot of savings. I mean, this, like, rig rates were exceptionally low. I mean, if you were completing, if you were doing stuff during 2020 or even 2021, you were getting pretty low rates. So, and the Rockies, though, didn't quite see as much of that because, again, we talked about most folks in North Dakota held their acres by production. There were a lot of publics there, but there were some privates. It just, we don't have as many private companies as prolific as say in the Permian Basin, where they kind of really ramped up. So I'm just curious how you saw that, what was the perspective there, and sort of coming out of that, getting that activity to come back.
Uh, it's most of our customers are or were public.
Mm-hmm.
One of our customers is recently gone private, but like, they're all, each one has a different view. I'll say, one of them has is a global major. They have, capital allocation decisions to make. Do we invest more in the Permian? Do we invest more in the Bakken? Others are more just Bakken focused.
Right.
That's, the 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 ladders, kind of who we saw step up first. Um, those types of companies. I mean, the larger companies uh, that had the ability to allocate capital, between different basins. Those were probably the slower ones to come back.
Right.
The public companies that, were primarily Bakken focused, they were simply a lot quicker because
Yep.
that's what they had.
Right. And they probably were able to capitalize on some nice gains when activity's slow, and they're able to,
I
like,
hope
bring
so.
stuff in. Yeah. Oh, I hope so too. Okay, so let's talk about Wyoming a little bit. Obviously, you're sitting in Casper, Wyoming. Um,
Yep.
which is awesome. I was born. Listeners know I was born in Cheyenne, was not raised there. But very proud to call Wyoming home, and do need to get back home closer, than Denver, Colorado. But that being said, so you're sitting in Wyoming. I worked at Anschutz Exploration. Was a manager of strategy and analytics for 2019 through 2020 before the COVID craziness, and then that changed. But I mean, I ripped apart. I knew the Powder River Basin really well. Ripped for every single Turner well. You guys are obviously, you're in the Powder, you have a gathering system, and Wyoming production is a whole unique animal in itself. And the Powder, I don't know if you listened to Harold Ham's podcast, but that I had with him on, and he talked about the Powder, and you can see his eyes light up because every geologist loves the Powder. it's a very geologically complex play, in my opinion, my humble opinion. It's hard, but there's also gets people really excited. And I've Wyoming production is at 262,000 barrels per day. I've just looked on EIA. So it's sort of like went down and come back, and it hasn't like ripped off the map or anything. But I mean, you guys are exposed in the Powder. That is a completely different animal. And as you were mentioning, I always tell people it's important to pay attention to individual operator behavior. And just because they're all public doesn't mean they think alike, or even just because they're all private does not mean they think alike or make decisions similarly. But the private's a unique animal where you do now have, well, I guess you've got big privates like Continental and Anschutz. You used to have some publics, but it's been a unique play with privates that were really the private equity model, and now these bigger privates. Maybe you can talk a little about that evolution, and also, where is it kind of sitting right now? Do we have the steady eddy where we have, Anschutz is strong enough in the play? I'm going to have Joe DeDominic on the podcast, so we'll follow up with that. But is it really steady? Do we have enough of, Continental Resources being bigger and steady as well to really sort of help this, work through the times and work through the system, and where we don't have to freak out if oil prices go to 60 and everybody lose their mind, that we can just sort of ride the course, and this is going to be maybe not a 700,000 barrel day play, but it's going to continue to bring activity and growth.
Okay, so let me start with just basic differences between the Bakken and the Powder.
Yeah,
And
have at it.
like
They're huge.
when as a pipeline operator that builds gathering systems, and when we're building a gathering system in North Dakota, to a Bakken well, we pretty much know what we're going to get. It's a big. Generally, they're big pads. They're 8 well pads or 10 well pads, whatever it might be. We can dial that in. We see that as a lower, from our standpoint, at least a lower risk. Uh, Lower risk because we just it's so much more homogeneous, throughout
Right.
throughout the basin. You get to the Powder, and as a pipeline operator, let me say this: as a pipeline operator, I don't like complex geology.
Absolutely, you do
I
not.
like the Bakken.
Yep. You like
I,
stability, predictability, repeatability. We know this. We're
right,
comfortable with this.
right, and I know our exploration guys get equally love it, but from our standpoint, it's are we going to get a um, 250,000 barrel EUR well, or are we going to get a 500,000 barrel? We just don't know, and we have a hard time. We have a hard time. I mean, we go and do it because we will take that risk, and especially on the operators that we trust and do a lot of business with.
Right.
We understand that, but it's not as I feel like we have to scrutinize our level. I guess you call it our margin of safety in the Powder is a lot lower than
Right.
it is in the Bakken when we take that capital risk on.
Do you think you guys I mean, Wyoming born and bred, and being next to the Powder, it's hard to resist, and I mean, that's a part of it. You're right there. You also know the companies. I mean, some of those companies are rollovers. You got Continental is in North Dakota
Yep.
as well as in Wyoming. I mean, had you guys not been there, I always kind of wonder sometimes the evolution of like other company. It might have been harder to get some of that stuff built because of that, the upfront risk there. I mean, you're gambling on it a little bit.
Yeah, and actually, quite honestly, the Powder River Basin is I would argue is probably a lot more competitive. One uh, uh, CEO of a competing pipeline told me, he was laughing. He was laughing about it. He goes, the Powder's really has three pipelines in a one pipeline basin, and which is
Yeah.
pretty true right now. The Powder's going to have to grow, significantly for all of us to make money. Um, and it just has to ramp up significantly before we do, but it's still the Bakken was at the same level. I remember when the Bakken or North Dakota production was less than 100,000 barrels a day.
Yep.
And, people started showing these, these growth charts of like 600,000 barrels a day. And I was just like, no, you guys are absolutely on, crack. This is ridiculous. And now, now we're at 1.2 and it's steady at 1.2.
Yep.
So if they can figure out, and the other thing I'll say about the powder that's different is the North Dakota has a lot more well capitalized um, exploration companies drilling up there. In the powder, there seems to be a lot more capital constraints on some of our producers. So when somebody likes, when a well capitalized producer like Continental comes in, or whether it's Anschutz, or and Anschutz has been there for quite a long time, it's exciting to see what they can come up with, because they just bring a better uh, a better balance sheet. They bring a better more capital to the basin. And instead of and I'll just give you an example. I gave the example of in North Dakota, we know there's going to be an 8 well pad. We know we know what the type curve is going to look like. We know
Right.
what our capital spend is going to look like. In Wyoming, it's they're still drilling 2 well pads. They're still kind of
Yep.
like testing things out. We need someone. We need someone as sophisticated as Continental or Anschutz to come in and start a program. And I'm not saying the others aren't
Right.
sophisticated. It's just that they just have smaller drilling programs. They have smaller budgets.
Yeah, and
And
no, I mean, I think you're hitting on something that's very clear, is that it's a little bit of the fly by nighters versus the staying power, and you have to have that. Of, I mean, we did have, I talk about it publicly a lot, of, when you saw the powder when it was up and coming. I mean, you had the four dude management teams, and everybody, four engineers, and somebody came from EOG, and we started an E&P, and we came into the powder, and they had made it in the Permian, and they had flipped a couple wells, and they tried to do this the powder, and oh, this is not the same play. Like, this is the geology is complex. This is much harder. And so you could drill one well and it could be okay. And you could drill another well and it could be crap. And so the ability to just flip this, and also the timing, when I mean, I was interested in starting my own oil company in the powder, as you knew, in like 2018. And that was a time where things were like hot and things were going and it was good. And then by the end of 2018, we're looking at much lower oil price. So we were in the 40s, I believe, before, Christmas Eve. And it sort of lost its this glistening gleam. But the people who were through it, were like Continental wasn't in there yet. They bought Samson stuff, and then they bought Chesapeake. But
right,
that was half the battle. Is that, I mean, I could write a dissertation on, the evolution of the Powder River Basin and the play that maybe will come someday. And it's hard because I remember, you and I were probably in DC stuff together. We were giving presentation stuff, but I was in DC and, talking about the Bakken, and people were like, I'm showing them production, and the EIA did not have production data. So they're showing production for North Dakota, and it would be like a few 100,000 barrels a day. And I'd be like, actually, it's like 500,000 barrels a day. And people would look at me in DC and be like, what? And then I'd be like, and I was starting to play with decline curves and growth stuff and saying, yes, I mean, these wells are really consistent. And that was crazy because, I'm in Oxford, I'm presenting a decline curve, and somebody from a, large foreign country in the Middle East would be like, that's ridiculous. How can we believe that decline curve? And I'm like, have we ever seen a decline? Have you ever shown a decline curve from your large oil company out of this Middle East, country? We've never seen one. But you show these decline curves to be like 1,000 barrels a day, nice clean decline. And I think it's that's a unique perspective, because North Dakota, for all the criticism that the Bakken now gets, is that there's not enough acreage and the inventory is running out, and it's dead, is the incredible consistency and the really great rock and the ability to, now it's a lot of Three Fork stuff is doing great. And that, I really encourage people to look at that productivity. It's just been fantastic. And so, to your point of being able to stay at 1.2 million barrels a day, that is really staying power. And then you get to the powder, and it's just a whole different animal. And it's not that it doesn't have growth potential, but you add in a lot of market complexities when you have different operators at different levels of their stages of, capital expenditures, and do they have the staying powder? And then you add in crude price volatility and COVID and all this stuff. And so we did have a lot of, the small private equity backed guys that were there pre-COVID. And then COVID happens, and I think that obviously changed a lot.
Sure.
I don't even know where some of those little guys, if they're doing anything. Some of them are still there. And then you had the whole private equity model shift where people thought, yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna package this stuff up, maybe we'll buy another small private equity guy, and then we'll just sell this to a big company. And it's like, okay, well, now which big company are you going to sell this to? And I think that got really tricky. And that's where it's not that you can have this debate on, is the rock going to give it to you? Or you're going to have this, when does it, come off the map? And it's really that, do you have companies that have consolidated their acreage positions, are drilling consistently, and are able to have the staying power to look through prices and sort of get their well costs down and bring in consistent well performance. And I think that was the biggest thing, is getting well costs down and bringing that consistent well performance. Because as you know, if you look at those back in the day, look at those Turner wells, I mean, it'd be like three wells together, and two would be awesome and one would suck. And you'd be like, okay, well, that's fun. And you start realizing there's some geology there, like, you just have to deal with that. Well, that one sucking isn't so bad if oil prices are higher, and and your well costs are lower. Then all of a sudden, the math starts making sense.
I hope so.
Yeah, well,
Um,
yes, we can table that. I mean, you're
yeah,
welcome to.
and that's I think it's from a producer standpoint, like and again, like we have federally regulated tariffs. We can't
Right.
increase our prices. We can't decrease our prices. Um, so when we connect and we're counting on three decent wells and two of them are good and one of them sucks, that's we take that hit, even
Yep.
though that you know even though the producer might say, hey, we're going to make this work, it all of a sudden we ended up taking that hit. And that's one of the especially one of the things that we see in the Powder is, and just the cause of, like, it's just a higher risk profile.
Yep.
It's a higher risk profile. It's very competitive. But it is, like, as you pointed out earlier, it's in our backyard. I literally can walk onto the roof of my office and see the Powder River Basin. It is
Yep.
hard to resist, going
Yeah.
out, because, quite honestly, some of these, some of the wells we've hooked up are absolute, barn burners, and you're like, wow, this is okay. The powder's a real thing, and then next well you hook up is like
Yep.
kind of disappointing, and you're like, oh, maybe yeah, that's right, we're still in the Powder.
Yep. You're still in the powder. That's it. That's a good comment. Yeah, I was. It was good to work. It was good to work in it, and it is an interesting play. But I think it's also something. I mean, just from a nerdy perspective, I don't think a lot of people appreciate is, like, and the formations, right? A lot of these were conventional. So we're attacking them from an unconventional standpoint of drilling horizontally and fracking them, but these were unconventional sandstones. So the stuff like the teapot was pretty easy. This was like, there's some formations in here that were great, and they were consistent, and you could pull up company. I'm gonna pull this out because I did this way before I ever worked at a company, but, like, look up Devon's teapot wells. Great, there's some really awesome teapot wells that are just 1,000 barrels a day, awesome. But then it's like, did you drill up all the teapots? Because now then you drill up all these conventional sandstones, and then they go to the Turner. And the Turner was harder because it sat below the Niobrara, so it's actually deeper, but it's also conventional sandstone, but it didn't have the consistent performance of, say, the teapot. And so you just add all this volatility and question marks into it. And yes, as a midstream side, and I have a previous life in doing a lot of midstream and downstream stuff, and it's a completely different business. I mean, you have to basically, as a midstream guy, you have to be an upstream guy. You have to be really close to those wells and know them super close. So yeah, I feel for you. Also, it's got to be exciting when you get three wells that come on consistent, and you put the decline curve, they put the decline curve, and everything matched up,
Right.
and it looks like it's going well.
That is an exciting time when it happens.
Yes, I can imagine.
So it's
So
it's interesting because, like, you know um, we do pay attention to what formation people are drilling, and we try to look at, like, surrounding formations. How well did the well do a mile away?
right.
Um, and we use that as a comparison. And oftentimes it's, a mile away is in apparently in geology is a long ways away. Um, you know, and
Yep.
you're in a completely different area. Um, so, we even have like, it's interesting because that's the data we have, is just to see what other producers or other
Right.
what the other well results have been in a certain area. And unfortunately, I think we've probably I think we've passed on some some deals where maybe we shouldn't have, and we probably passed on some deals where we did our homework um, and said, hey, we're not gonna. There's too much risk on this one for us. Let somebody else go pipe that up. And
And
it's interesting when you're talking about the different gel. What popped into my mind is like, yeah, I know the exploration companies are really focused on like the vertical, like Niobrara,
right.
Turner,
Yep.
Teapot, whatever it might be. You know, we run horizontally, and so I'm focused more on like the differences between. This is another interesting difference that between North Dakota and Wyoming is in North Dakota you have a bunch of farms. These are you know
Hmm.
uh, 500-acre farms, and so to build a mile, you're going to cross over 5, 6 different farms, and you have to get 5, 6 different easements. In Wyoming, it might be just one ranch. You have
Yep.
these giant ranches, and and so some of the landowners, and they are extremely sophisticated.
Hmm.
They have a lot of things going on. They have like wind turbines going up. They have solar farms going in. They have pipelines going across them. Um, but again, to hook up, we're going to build 5 miles. We might have to just deal with one landowner, and
Yep.
whereas North Dakota, it's 20, 30, 30 at a time. So it's
Which do
from
you
a
think is easier? I feel like in
what's
North,
that?
I feel like North Dakota has been easier in many ways. I feel like there's been, landowners in Wyoming can be, they can hold out pretty hard.
Well, as a fellow landowner, I
Uh
don't
huh.
want to speak, but I will say that they are tough, they're
Yep.
sophisticated, and they've had um, they've had years and years of years experience, and most of the ranchers are have have had these ranches in multiple generations.
Yep.
And I'll give you an example of we were trying to, this is years ago, this is probably 10 plus years ago, but I remember we're actually trying to abandon some pipe on a one landowner's and the landowner wouldn't let us on. And we were like, we're trying to get off your property, like help us get off your property, and finally they wanted it, they insisted, this is going on for over a year, and he wouldn't let us on the property. We're trying to get on the property to blow our lines out. um, and finally he kept insisting out to meet with me, and I was like, well, it took a while to arrange. Okay, so anyway they show up, we sit down in our conference room, start chatting, and and having a wonderful talk for like 30 minutes about whatever. And then finally I just asked him, I said, I don't understand, we're trying to get off your property, what's the problem? And he goes he goes, your grandfather condemned across my grandfather's ranch
Yep.
back in 1967. I was like, wow, that's but
Yep.
it's amazing. Like I've never you get hard landowners everywhere, but
Hmm.
I'd never seen one that had these are
Held the grudge that
multi-generational
long.
ranches.
Yeah. Yep.
There's family lore.
Yep.
There's um, there's a lot of things that go on in there. So it's
Well, we all know Wyoming's the one big small town. So it's just you're connected to some degree, no matter
absolutely,
what. Um,
absolutely.
which is the good and bad. But that's a great story. So okay, we've burned through a lot of more time quite easily. So Tad, this may be something you're comfortable or not comfortable talking about, but I am always intrigued with um the state of play and taking into account what we just talked about, the geological complexity of Wyoming is part of why Wyoming production is um, 262,000 barrels a day and not 500,000 barrels a day. And the state of the company, unique companies, etc. But that being said, just south of Wyoming is Colorado, and Colorado is a completely different animal in terms of being an oil and gas state. This is not a state politically friendly to oil and gas. This is a state that has 452,000 barrels a day of production reluctantly. It's a bit like the Biden administration anti-oil and gas, but having nearly 13 million barrels a day oil and gas production in the U.S. I mean, Colorado has this production, but it's not because police or any of the regulators are helping the industry actually get permits to drill and complete wells.
Right.
And I can't be the only person. I know there are a lot of folks that look at this and look at Wyoming and being, obviously I was born there, have family there, care deeply about the state. But I mean, and Wyoming has the largest surface coal mines in the world. Has a wealth of natural resources from coal to natural gas to oil, and also understands it. Has been generationally through booms and busts. Like the state does really well in many respects with revenue on education. Part of this because you have a lower population, but I mean, it's pretty to me looking Colorado versus Wyoming. I'm always curious why Wyoming has not stepped up to the plate to really grab more activity from the DJ and say, you can't do business here in Colorado. We're happy to take your business. We are state open for business. We care about our natural resources. We obviously want to drill and produce them properly, but come here, come play in the Powder. Yes, it's a hard play, but like we welcome your business. And I haven't seen that personally stepped up enough, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
I
And if you
have
don't want to tackle that, go ahead. I mean,
no,
let
I
me
have
know.
two different thoughts on that. Um, and number one, you have to remember half of the surface acreage in Wyoming is owned by the federal government.
Yes,
It's
that's true.
BLM, it's
Lots of
Forest
federal land.
Service.
Yep.
You know, I know we went to a federal lease sale, and the last minute they just cancel it. That's kind of that basically is direct result of the administration.
Yep.
So I think that is a challenge right there. Not necessarily, it has nothing to do with the state politics. And on the flip side, though, I'd also say that you know from a midstream standpoint, we were, and I can't get too much into it, but we were competing on a terminal, and one of the risks that the customer pointed out was, the competition. It's a rail terminal in Colorado versus a rail terminal in Wyoming. We had to build stuff in Wyoming. One of the risks that the customer looked at was, hey, we're worried that the Colorado can't even get their permit.
Yep.
We got our permit before we even got an agreement to before we got an agreement on the terminal. So I think that's that's one example, I think, of where Wyoming is definitely a better place to have. If you're building stuff, Wyoming is
Right.
definitely a better place to be. Absolutely. And I agree with your premise, but there are constraints. Federal government owns 50% of the land, or at least the surface, and then on the plus side, I know we've won deals simply because Wyoming does encourage. They have a lot simpler permitting process than, say,
Right.
Colorado. And that's an
Okay.
example of,
Yep.
we've actually won a big terminal deal. So
Okay, that's great clarity. Really appreciate that, and couldn't agree more. I think that there's things where on the pro business side works out really well to get a terminal. The federal land, I want to ask about that, but do you think that's before I ask about federal land comparisons? So I think that is really important. I mean, we've seen the Biden administration has really the lease sales and federal land has come off, and I think it's important to appreciate how states like Wyoming have been severely impacted that, like Alaska as well. Of
sure,
people want Wyoming has definitely lost business because the Biden administration is not the federal leases and the sales, but also just permitting has declined considerably from the previous administration to the Biden administration. Even just re-upping permits have basically gone to zero, and that's a big deal for all kinds of companies. I mean, Oxy is a company that notes that publicly and has been noting it for years about that inability to re-up a permit. Oxy is present in the Powder as well as Colorado. But I think from a I'm curious as to, and this could just be Wyoming politics. I mean, I talked to you about this on offline, previously, and I had my own thoughts on it. But do you think, I mean, could Wyoming be doing more from I don't know what different entities you have. The Wyoming pipe used to be a Wyoming Pipeline Authority. Now you have the executive. There's been some restructuring with all that within Wyoming. But from an energy perspective of just saying, hey, let's go. We're open for business. And I think that let's go helps a lot from, you have the geological complexities. This is the oil
Hmm.
business. We have all the oil prices, but you do sort of need that let's go mentality in order to get that ramped up and to say, hey, Colorado, you suck. You're not permitting. You don't have the environment to do business. You have great geology and and we have a lot of consistency in the DJ and fantastic geology. But hey, we have this, and I'm just not sure. Maybe that I don't feel like that's been done.
And here's my first reaction to that. Um, I quite honestly, from a private industry standpoint, I don't want government leading the way, whether it's state or federal.
That's
That's
fair.
like they're having them to just I think they have the policies in place. And they're not monkeying with stuff. I appreciate that. North Dakota is a lot more. Uh, I think North Dakota has done a great job being more promotional, but at the same
Yep.
time, there's also instances where the North Dakota gets a little bit ahead of itself and like gets. I don't want to get into specific examples, but like um, I appreciate the non-interventionist government in Wyoming. How about that?
Okay, that's fair. No, and we're probably talking about we're splitting hairs on different things because there's a perspective to that, and I think also actually the state of oil matters a lot, and
Hmm.
the volatility that Wyoming's experienced has probably impacted regulators, and not just regulators, but people in offices that are helping on the business side. If you don't have a booming oil play, it's hard to be like, oh my gosh, it isn't booming, so you have to navigate that too. So my hands up in the air to help these folks because I'm all in on making it go better. But can you give us? There's two things I want to ask about before we close because this has been fantastic, Tad. I really appreciate it. So the Biden federal land piece, and I want to clarify this because I think you could give a little. Can you give a little bit more color on the federal land in Wyoming and how bad has that the impact? Is it just on paper what we're seeing? How bad is the impact of the slowdown in permitting on federal land been in the state of Wyoming? And the last question I do want to ask is on Dakota access, because I think it wouldn't be fair to listeners to not ask that question. I'm going to be covering that more in future podcasts. But it's a pretty big issue of potentially openings with Dakota access, which could be game changing on the pipeline side. But we'll start with the federal land piece and Wyoming and what's real and what's not real.
Okay, so just for perspective, when I started, 20 years ago in the industry, um, and I'm going to come at it from a midstream perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, if we ran into it, if we were building a piece of pipe and we had an option of going left or right, right was private landowner, left was the federal landowner. We'd always want to go across the private landowner because generally it just happened faster. Now,
Yep.
dealing with the feds, it would take a long if we got a angry landowner that just didn't want a piece of pipe on their property. Okay, the feds might take some time, but you knew you're going to get it.
Right.
That I would say since the Obama administration, that has completely changed. That is a new risk that where it's gone from it might take some time, you have to go through some headache, it has to jump through the hoops, but you knew at the end you're going to get an easement to build out. Now it's like there's a legitimate risk that, and it's really you don't know if you're going to be able to build a piece of pipe. You simply just don't know. Now, in Wyoming, fortunately, a lot of the control is at the local level, which can be good and can be bad. Um, but again, it's in some cases, it's you just don't know if you're going to be able to build, and that becomes like when 50% of the surface is owned by the federal government, that becomes a big risk. I mean,
Right.
you're crossing whether it's Forest Service, BLM, you're crossing them everywhere you go, and it is a significant risk now, and and that's like you know how we have to build to stay in business.
Right.
So that's when we look at that, we look at it very, very seriously.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good perspective. And I think that people have to appreciate that, because then if you compound that with the volatility of a geologic complexity and the ability to get plays up and going, when you compound that with additional regulatory, or with the federal hurdles, it can throttle. Um, I mean, it can really throttle the ability to lay pipe and do stuff and get stuff off the ground. And if you don't have that midstream aspect, you can't have the upstream. I mean, you guys are
Yeah.
the critical piece of that. So no, that's great. That's great perspective. On the have you heard from folks complaining that, hey, we're not getting our permits to drill, and therefore, hey, Tad, we're not going to be able to, we told you we're going to bring on 10 wells, but we're not going to, because the slowness in the permitting is just so slow. I asked that because for a lot of operators I've actually talked to, while they complain about the permitting, they're still they had a lot of permits together. It's more
Yeah.
the future stuff that they're concerned about.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's
Okay.
fair. I'm thinking of one place in particular that, you know, one of our customers, operator, very sophisticated. Um, uh, you know, they came in, had some, incredible well results, and but the problem is that it's the whole thing is just slowed down.
Right.
So, but we're moving forward. We know that there's two big operators out there. The other big operator is simply just kind of wait until they get all their permits. And so, yeah, it'll come. Maybe it's going to be slow. Maybe they have to wait for a different administration. But it is on federal property, and you know, um, they just it's just it's sometimes it's timing. Sometimes they just can't get the permits.
Right. Yeah, really appreciate that color. Okay, so last question, Dakota Access, and
Okay.
admittedly I have not got to dive into this because I just did this podcast, and I've been so under the water with some big deliverables that have nothing to do with Dakota Access. I Dakota Access, apparently the EIS, the environmental impact statement, is apparently being reopened, which means that, which was, Dakota Access is a pipeline. We all know it was very controversial. Getting this flowing shouldn't have been as controversial, but it's flowing crude oil. It was a big deal for North Dakota to sort of really actually, in the Williston Basin, to actually flow this and have ample, in addition to your pipes, have ample pipeline capacity, and really a different route. Dakota Access goes, from North Dakota to the Midwest and then down to the Gulf Coast, which is a huge deal to bypass Cushing, Oklahoma. And now, apparently, this little piece is getting reopened for an environmental impact statement, which is really serious. And I'll be diving that into future podcasts, but it's really serious. If that's up for grabs, could this, in theory, this pipeline could be shut down, and then there's whole legal issues of opening up other pipelines. So whatever you're comfortable on that subject of tackling that, I would love to just know any thoughts you could share, or opinions or anything. I would love to hear it.
Okay, so here's the way I look at it is the overall context again is regulatory certainty.
Yep.
That's, as an infrastructure company, that's what we need. And reopening EISs after you've already put 100% of your capital literally into the ground, is incredibly, in my mind, just irresponsible. I don't think this administration is going to um, is going to do anything, and the reason is like we have Dakota Access serves North Dakota. They pump about half the Bakken, and if with prices at $80+ even though they've come back down from 90 in the last couple of weeks, the impact of shutting in effectively
Yeah.
half the
Huge.
Bakken is going to have a huge impact on WTI, on gas prices, on voters, and I don't think I can't imagine. Let me say this: I've been wrong before, but I can't imagine the administration would want to go into um, uh, make a decision where they shut down 600,000 barrels a day of production in the United States, and impact gasoline prices going into going into an election. And it's
that's really good perspective. I like that.
yeah, it would be to in my mind, like they they might get like some cheers on the from the far left, but at the end of the day, you know, and Biden's like Biden's very looks at gasoline prices and realizes that's a big chunk, and if they want if they think high gasoline prices is going to help them get reelected, have at her, But
Yeah, so I
I
mean, I think that's great color. I mean, I think that there's probably more talk on it, and I think there's some risk. There's always risk and uncertainty, but that's good perspective of. I don't actually think they're as educated on hydrocarbons and oil and gas and probably infrastructure and pipelines as we hope they are. Unfortunately, so that's the job of people like ourselves to do that. But so Dakota Access is flowing. That's half. They're flowing. What's that nameplate capacity? It's over 1 million barrels a day, or the nameplate capacity is under 1 million barrels a day, and they're
yeah
flowing, I mean, 700, 800,000 barrels a day.
I don't know the actual numbers, but if I was
Okay.
to guess, it's about 600,000.
Okay. 600,000 barrels a day. And what is your, if you're allowed to share that, what is your capacity? Can you share a rough number? If you can't, that's fine.
Uh, I mean, rough capacity, call it 400,
Okay. Yeah.
and
That's
we're 350 or so. And
okay.
the good thing about let me say this the good thing about coming out of COVID is we did end up finishing our projects, so we ended up having new steel from North Dakota all the way down to Guernsey. We've replaced or we have yeah we just ended at that. We have new steel all the way from North Dakota to Guernsey, and that's I think from our standpoint that's a big deal. You know, that
Yeah. No,
ensures
that's
that
a
we
huge
can
deal.
that ensures we can operate for another 50 plus years with
Yep.
this deal with the infrastructure that we got.
Yeah, well, Tad, you have been a fantastic guest. I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and talk about companies with staying power. I mean, you guys have it, and you show it well on especially on the midstream side. And for a first-time podcast person, you crushed it. So I'm sure you'll have plenty of people asking you to do it. But you're a friend and a colleague, and the color and commentary is just awesome. So I can't thank you enough.
Well, it's been fun. Thank you, Trisha.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks. Bye, guys.